One of the questions I get asked consistently is, why now? How did this happen? What's going on here? This boom in the market. And this is where we're going to go a little bit nerdy, and I ask you to humbly just go with me a little bit if you would. One of the big reasons is because of the muscles behind it. Our computers and the literal GPUs, graphics processing units, are just different. Hopefully you've heard NVIDIA is making these huge advances in the market, eventually towards quantum and so forth. But think about these as the machine muscles behind it. We also have big data. The size of these data sets is almost impossible for our brains to comprehend how much of the data is being leveraged. And then lastly, we have machine learning. Literally, large language models are a version of machine learning, but what we've got is these patterns amongst these pieces of data, and our ability to see these patterns faster and faster because of these huge muscles processing it behind the scenes. So I see this as a trifecta of how this has changed and evolved.